want to let you know you are being recorded.
Yay! I'm being recorded. I can't believe it. After 20 minutes of amazing podcasting gold that
content, as I discovered, Greg sold all his Dave Cockrum X-Men books, and instead of letting me have a first chance at them, even though he knows I love Dave Cockrum,
I know, but
and it's not Dave Cockrum on Legion, but geez, I have those. Those are cheap. You can buy those for $1.
Sometimes it's just one of those things where you're just like, hey, do I let Dan keep adding to the horde?
Yes, for those,
or do I pepper the comic books in?
No, you don't.
Stuff at the Emporium. I know what Dan would want, but I know what the people want. And these are our comics.
Want in this case.
These are the people's comics.
Well, you're just being an idiot. So that's there's been some sickness in the Retro Emporium household, so we wanted to keep it easy and simple this episode. And it's the start of a new year. And what book is better to indicate a new start for several reasons, right? Than Giant Size X-Men #1.
Hey, Giant Size X-Men #1. It's Giant Size. It's X-Men, and it's #1.
And let's set some ground rules for this book. I'm going to tell you what we're not going to do.
What are we not going to do?
We are not going to try to cover every angle possible on Giant Size X-Men #1 because...
But why not? There's so many angles we could cover on X-Men, Giant Size X-Men #1.
There are many angles we could cover. This is one that's been overanalyzed to death. So...
How?
I'm sure people have reviewed it many, many times.
Who?
Everyone.
Not us.
It's one of the most famous books.
We haven't.
Comics.
We've never talked about it.
No, we haven't. No. Well, we've kind of talked about it because I've talked about Dave Cockrum moving from Legion to X-Men.
Yeah.
And I know I've mentioned on the podcast that Dave Cockrum's art was responsible for the #2 selling book at DC in the 1980s and the #1 selling book at Marvel in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And I should say his art, but his art designs, right?
Like his designs, characters, his amazingness that he brought to the page from his mind.
Yes. So obviously that happens. So we'll talk a little bit about that. You're going to cover a little bit of probably X-Men lead up into this when I don't know what I'm talking about because I've never read them.
And you're
this
mad
book came out the year I was born.
And you're like, oh, he had X-Men, and then he just sold them off, and I'm so mad that he just didn't tell me about them. And here's a guy that's never read them, and he's mad that I just got rid of them.
Well, I didn't read the pre-Cockrum X-Men in Claremont. That's correct, right? This Len Wein book is, and then it's Claremont. Yeah, I would have taken Cockrum and Claremont books 1 billion times over. They're you're killing me because you know exactly what I'm. You're being ridiculous. You know exactly the ones that I like, and then you're like, I sold those. I was bored with them.
I know. Well, I mean, and I find it funny too. Like when I opened up the message from you, and I'm sorry, losing my voice here a little bit. When I said, oh, what this, I mentioned what this was, and my wife was like, oh, so you usually read, so I read, this is one of my annual reads. This is definitely in my pile of stuff that I would cover in my own, oh, hey, yeah, it's that time of year. Pull it out, dust it off, and, check back in with the team.
And I should, I need to add to your annual year, the Legion introduction to Wildfire, 2 years before, right? Because then you'd get double Cockrum graded, greatness, right? You need a couple of them. Of course you did. Well, and the funny thing here is I think we're going to get into future artists later, but so we are covering Giant Size X-Men #1.
Yes.
And the very first annoying thing about Giant Size X-Men #1 is they hired Dave Cockrum away from DC, put him on X-Men to relaunch it.
Yes.
And it had Gil Kane draw the cover with Dave Cockrum's designs. Now, what are Gil Kane's strengths? A, faces, or B, costume design?
Yes. Faces.
And the faces on here ain't that great.
Actually,
that's not true. the blue wash faces, the black and white faces in the background of the old X-Men.
Oh yeah,
are
those
fantastic.
Are awesome.
And then it's like he's like, well, I don't get to draw the book, so I'm going to draw all the faces on the Cockrum characters terribly.
Yeah, no, those blue wash faces of X-Men team futures past, like they are.
It's almost like Gil Kane was saying, I'm going to draw the Silver Age beautifully and the Bronze Age terribly.
Yeah, they look. I mean,
on purpose.
Storm's looking pretty
contorted,
and yeah, Wolverine's got he looks like a rubber stamp, and
everybody has
else,
white eyes, or
no,
yellow eyes, but nobody has pupils. There are no
Nightcrawler looks like a rubber stamp. Yeah, Thunderbird looking pretty bad. Cyclops is not even looking like good. Cyclops looks like he's going diving.
Yeah. So it's super interesting because we get Giant Size X-Men #1, and there are two interesting things about it right off, right? One, you have a Gil Kane cover.
Yeah.
And two, Len Wein writes it, and then Len Wein co-plots with Chris Claremont for the next few issues, but then it's Claremont's book for the next 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
More than that, 18 years, right? Because he was well into 93, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking, because he still held Uncanny even when Jim Lee was drawing, right?
I believe, yeah.
And when they relaunched it #1, I forget, did Jim Lee write and draw it?
I think he did write and draw and continued on for
a bit.
Until
he went to Image.
Until he went to Image, yeah. It was his book until then. So.
And then they tried to bring back Claremont in the book was it with Extreme X-Men?
Extreme X-Men.
And then they tried to bring Claremont back again on the book. But Claremont had a good 15-year run. 18-year run. So
he had a pretty good chunk of time. And then he did a couple of really interesting things with, I want to say, additional characters that were bringing characters into different storylines that were not that were underutilized in previous stories. So I found that a lot of stuff that was brought into these runs were really really
but I mean, let's be honest. Chris Claremont's known for the X universe, right?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, a lot of what he did definitely turned into the movies, and a lot of the movie matter isn't the best stories per se, because if you take a listen to a ton of different podcasts, I'm not talking let's chop up the X-Men stories and talk about all the different stories. I'm talking about there's some really fantastic X-Men podcasts that are just let's go through and do an audio podcast telling of the X-Men, and they do a great job in giving you a very cinematic story for the mind podcast, and it's a much better cinematic universe.
Sure, but the Claremont run, okay, the world creation, including New Mutants, right, including Wheezy wrote X Factor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so before she went over to do Superman, right, at DC, mm-hmm. and Claremont, but she was working with Claremont on the whole universe, right? It wasn't just when they brought X Factor, and they only brought X Factor back because of the popularity of X-Men, right?
Yeah.
So, an X Factor, for those who don't know, that was the relaunch of the original X-Men team.
Mm-hmm.
And New Mutants, and then it was his universe for a long time. And
New Mutants, X Factor, Alpha Flight, all the different team books that come out.
And I've seen sad Chris Claremont sitting at conventions before with nobody at his table, and I'm like, what the hell? But admittedly too, Chris Claremont got mad after he was put off of X-Men and went to DC, which is to be expected, right? And then because it's still unclear why they thought they needed to take him off of X-Men, and when they were at their height selling 1 million issues, right? It didn't make any sense. And then because they were on a kick for new artists, and they lost all those new artists to, well, we know Jim Shooter's an idiot.
Mm-hmm. Pow, pow.
Jim Shooter's on a kick for new artists. Was like, Claremont's been on the book too long. Let's get him off of there. And maybe that was true, except they were selling 1 million copies and the story quality went way down. And that ended up being part of the downfall of comics in the 90s. Because X-Men breezed in is like the strongest franchise in comics. Right. And the downgrade of the X-Men storytelling quality with the pretty art was part of its downfall. Mm-hmm. And of course, they were also like, well, X-Force, they got in there. That's amazing. We love this new violent shit. We got to get Claremont out of there. And I'm not saying Claremont was perfect. I mean, we have some terrible fucking characters that came out of that run. But of course you have terrible characters. It's 18 fucking years, right? Like, there's going to be some characters that aren't great.
Right.
That's going to happen. But what I think people forget, and we're talking about Claremont's not even the writer for the first story. No. Len Wein is the writer for the first story.
Yeah.
And all the concepts came from a guy named that people don't talk about because he was only on the book for 2 years. And then John Byrne takes over as the artist, right, with Claremont, is Dave Cockrum. And Dave Cockrum is as responsible. I want to say as responsible, probably the most responsible person for the X-Men. Claremont creates the universe, but Dave Cockrum creates
the characters,
the uncanny X-Men.
Yeah, because without Dave Cockrum, you don't get the designs, you don't get the actual characters.
And Cockrum even was beyond designs, right? He's into the backstory matter, too, because he uses the backstory matter. Cockrum used to study fashion magazines of the time and then try to draw runway fashions onto superheroes. And if you look at Storm's costume, it's very much that. If you look at Colossus's costume, it's very much something you'd try to put together that would only work on a runway, right? Like it would not work in real society.
Yeah. Same with Thunderbird. Like, it's not something. And the same when you take a look at it, it's really interesting too. Like you take a look at like Nightcrawler, and everybody's seen the meme out there. Oh, it's a demonic Captain Neo, but Nightcrawler's outfit did spawn a very interesting design based off of what Dave Cockrum created based off of his fashion love, his love for fashion and high fashion and high form, right?
Well, and the other thing with Cockrum, I mean, if you know the history of the Nightcrawler character, Cockrum had been drawing Nightcrawler for years before he ever made a first appearance. Cockrum had pitched versions of Nightcrawler to DC and had been drawing Nightcrawler forever. Like he was pitching Nightcrawler to DC as early as 71, I think. And I have 3 different Dave Cockrum books. We're going to be referencing one of them, the Life and Art of Dave Cockrum by Glenn Cadogan, but I have 2. One I bought specifically when he was dying of cancer that was used to support his treatment, if you can believe it, because, he's a comic book artist, yet none of the freaking comic book companies he worked for would actually help him with health insurance or anything when he was dying. So I have one of those books. And yeah, I mean, he had drawn Nightcrawler several times. He'd drawn Nightcrawler into some back matter for a group called the Outsiders he was pitching to DC. He was also pitching 2 other groups one other group called the Devastators or the Annihilators. I almost called them the Annihilators, which is a great. But he was pitching basically. He was trying to universe build in the 30th century. And DC just wasn't ready for it because he was revitalizing the Legion of Superheroes at the time. And so Legion starts to catch on in sales. And as Legion is catching on in sales, he's like, okay, let's pitch some more world building here. The sad part is DC could have had all of this.
They could have had all these characters.
They could have had all of this. And DC's like, no, we don't want this. And then I guess the back matter I want to share that I've referenced before is Dave Cockrum. So this is how it ties to last week, folks. We covered a tabloid issue.
Yes.
And Dave Cockrum drew a tabloid issue with the marriage of Bouncing Boy and Duo Damsel. And people often call Bouncing Boy the luckiest Legionnaire because he's married to Duo Damsel.
I see.
You see. Not even a pop for that. You're just going to be like, I'm going to no-sell you there. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, duo damsel. Yay.
Wow, yeah, you suck. So it's it is but he basically, so he draws these huge tabloid pages, right? And he draws this amazing tabloid page that has like all the Legionnaires standing on these round elevated platforms. Uh-huh. And basically the writers, I think Paul Levitz actually had something to do with it, but Paul Levitz liked to do things to get rid of, it may have been Shooter, it may have been Levitz, I can't remember, but right at the exact time period. I think it still might have been Shooter even. But they like to sometimes get rid of characters that were hard to write, like Bouncing Boy and Duo Damsel. Well, Bouncing Boy can bounce and Duo Damsel can split into two.
Two is better than one.
Yes, in the 30th century, maybe not the most, exotic or useful power, right? So, but he draws this beautiful spread. He draws basically a whole ton of characters. And he just goes to DC and he goes to Mort Weisinger and he's like, hey, I would like my art back from that book. And he says they promised it to him. They say they didn't, but they won't return his art. So he quit.
Oh,
just straight up. And at the height of his popularity, relaunching a book, he quits. Now, one major difference that we're going to see in Cockrum's history here is that Mike Grell takes over the Legion for Cockrum. And Mike Grell does some tracing, but Mike Grell also creates himself. And so there are new costumes and more things that keep coming in the Legion. And the Legion keeps getting popular almost solely on Mike Grell's art, because I'm going to tell you that the Carrie Bates and Jim Shooter stories weren't the thing that was carrying it. It wasn't much later until Paul Levitz gets like a 6-year run on Legion when it really takes off, which you're going to notice a theme here. Writer, long run with great art results in sales. At least back then, at least in the Bronze Age, right? And the 80s, right? Now I don't know that works, right? Now it's a lot of times it's like put a great artist and writer together that people know about and give them a 12-issue run on something.
Yeah, and then
hope that sells.
And if it doesn't, then take it, throw it away, and then let something else happen.
Right, and so you're not getting these long extended runs on books anymore, right?
Right.
But just in the Legion, right? The Legion fans brought it back because they're like, this stuff's crazy, and they had APA's Amateur Press Association, for those of you that don't know, and a lot of writing about that. And Dave Cockrum interacted with those folks a ton and got people all excited about the book. And so it had to be when Dave Cockrum goes to Marvel, right? And he's given X-Men. I mean, we're talking about a book, and this is where you can give some of the background, but we're talking about a book that was in reprints for 2 years, right?
Right. Yeah.
And at least 2 years. And the last great artist they'd thrown onto the book was Neil Adams.
Yeah.
And people weren't buying a Neil Adams drawn book. So the stories must have been freaking terrible, right?
Well, I think at that point, too, they'd already run a bunch of stuff. I mean, they'd already been running a lot of stories that felt like it was, in all honesty, going back and taking a look at some of the stories, it felt like, how many times can the team, and you're dealing with a team of teenagers that are bucking against a system that wants to keep them down, bucking against a mentor who is saying that they're there for their best interest, but as they're finding out, and as the story nearing this point in the story, is doing things in order to get what they think is what the kids think is not in their best interest, but what Professor X is like, no, this is in your best interest, and manipulating them in a way. And then, obviously, not to spill the beans for anybody on a 30 plus 40-year-old story, but Beast is like, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. You've invaded everybody's minds, Professor X, and I'm out. And that causes everybody basically to rethink what they're doing, And at one point, everybody jams out. causes a bunch of stuff to, go sideways in the school. And, at a point there's like nobody there, for a while. And it's like, Scott's like, no, this is the only place that I know. And, he's like the brooding X-Men. He's like very emo Scott. And
when you get a big run of Roy Thomas early on in Roy Thomas's writing, right? With Neil Adams' art.
Yeah.
Looking back on these, so the reprints start at issue 67 and the new stories start in issue 94. So it had been about 3 years of reprints, just to keep the property alive.
Yeah.
It looks like the last issue you were saying that the Beast kind of was. They're
trying to
the Beast.
Yeah, they're trying to, obviously they need to make somebody. He's the oldest of the group, and he's not the leader. Scott's the leader. But he's like, hey, I'm out and I'm going to go I need to go and do what I need to do in my life, as an adult. Right. So he leaves and that causes a big rift. And then he's like, Professor X didn't do anybody right because he invaded Jean's mind. He messed with us all. He's not got our best interest. You need to rethink what you guys are doing. And basically that causes a fracture in the house. Everyone kind of like has to rethink what they're doing. And, Beast comes back and forth in the house multiple times and with the team to help them out throughout the history of X-Men. But at this point in the series, he's out and leaving Scott and the original X-Men to like where they're at right before this book, Second Genesis, kicks off. And they're trying to basically like gather up other mutants and stuff like that, trying to find other powerful mutants because they've got all these things that are going on in the world. They're at this point, they've already fought Magneto. They've got Magneto and all these things that are going on. They're already going up against the first wave of the government implementing different types of mandates. They got the Sentinels, but they've got the first mandate against mutants and mutant kind, and then putting the Sentinels out there. Although these Sentinels aren't free-thinking Sentinels at this point, they're just Sentinels. And then as we start to move forward into the books, then they become more of a, sentient Sentinel.
Yeah.
So,
well, and the other one piece of back matter that I want to share too before we get moving forward, the crazy part. So the original series ends in 1970. So January of 1970 with a cover date of March 1970.
Yeah.
It's the last issue. The Marvel tries to relaunch the Beast on his own, which is why they sort of have, and you get the big blue furry Beast. He's still the not furry Beast in 1970. So I think they brought him in Marvel Premiere. They make him an Avenger. So the Beast is sort of off on his own, and you'll see that referenced in the book here. So they were trying to use the Beast, but it was not successful. Actually, it was not a successful solo code.
It's kind of sad too, because up until the point where he joins the X-Men, he's just a normal dude with big feet, and then he's got some amped up powers. He's like a good football player, all these other things, and then as he's working on his science stuff, he wants to get rid of his powers, or not his powers, but his appearance, right? His mutant type appearance, and then that's how he ends up as the big furry Beast. And then this whole entire time that he's off on his own, he's trying to just reverse this thing, and it just keeps making it worse.
And then you get and then the other thing I'll just toss out there that you probably knew but I didn't, so not issue 66, which is the last issue, right? But there's a fill-in issue in issue 65, which shouldn't surprise you that there's a fill-in issue because they're about to end a series, right?
Yeah.
The writer and penciling team for the fill-in issue are Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams.
Yeah.
About to go to DC.
About to move. And
launch a very critically acclaimed but unsuccessful Green Lantern. Green Arrow.
Oh, I know. It's so sad.
And then, that run gave them Batman, right? So then they did Batman, and that was hugely successful. So, and obviously the Green Lantern, Green Arrow stuff, we did the drug issues, and we've done the first appearance of Jon Stewart on the podcast.
Honestly, though, without that run of Green Arrow, Green Lantern, you don't end up with the Green Arrow TV show.
Green Arrow anything. Yeah, and you don't end up with the classic 70s Batman stories.
Or the Green Lantern movie with everyone's favorite. Oh God,
no, the Green Lantern. No, the Green Lantern movie. It was a joke. Please stop. The Green Lantern movie is very steeped in those Gil Kane, John Broome stories, which, again, talk about picking up a terrible era to do a movie about, right? It's like, let's go to the Silver Age and do the movie based off the Silver Age. Genius. Right. Beautiful art with terrible stories. We're back to that again. You're just baiting me now, right?
I didn't mean to sidetrack you.
But no, I think all this back matter is important, though, because one, there's just a circle of amazing freaking writers and artists here. And then, Len Wein is going to do a bunch of stuff for DC, too, after this, like Swamp Thing. You've heard of that guy.
Yeah, the Swamp Thing guy. We talked about him last week. Yeah,
issue. There's a lot of tie-ins happening right now because we're stuck in the middle of the 70s. But Cockrum comes over, and the idea is to put Cockrum on this book with new writer Chris Claremont, and Len Wein is going to be, like we said, Chris Claremont's babysitter for the first few issues. Mm-hmm. So they get Claremont over, and he basically opens his book full of designs and says, "Well, here's all the shit that I pitched to DC." And Len Wein says, "Well, I've got some character ideas. We want to." By the way, before we continue to the first page, there are some amazing fishing reels you can get for $14.95.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, I just want to make sure we point out the fishing reels. But we get
411 pieces. Damn. Yeah. Let's go down to the Puyallup River.
So we flip this, and first off, we get a splash.
We have been going for 46 minutes, and we finally got to the first page.
Yeah,
this is amazing podcasting, people.
Yeah, well, we're to the first page. Like I said, we're not going to necessarily try to cover the story word page by page because we think most people know the story.
They don't.
But when we're looking at this, it's funny. We get a cover by Gil Kane. And probably, knowing Cockrum, probably just as a giant fuck you, he just draws the cover again as a splash page, but better.
He redoes the same art, but 100 times better. And it is as the kids on the street today say, this is lit.
Yeah,
AF.
well, and he even draws the X-Men as they are now, like how they'd be looking at these folks. So you get the Blue Beast, right?
Yeah.
And you get the original lineup. Right. Uh-huh. So we don't have Havoc back there or anything. We have the original lineup. We've got Marvel Girl, mm-hmm. otherwise known as Jean Grey. We have Angel, and Cyclops, and Beast, and Iceman, but not the snowball kind.
Yeah.
So, and then we've got a splash page, and we'll be introduced to all these characters because we don't know who they are yet.
That's right. They're Wolverine. All new.
No, that's not true. We know who some of these characters are.
Okay.
If you read X-Men. So you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, but if you read X-Men, we know who Wolverine, well, no. Okay. If you read the Hulk, you know who Wolverine is.
You know who Wolverine is from the Hulk. And if you actually in some of the previous in some of the previous back matter of the X-Men, you might have been introduced to one or two characters from the previous issues. They might have just dropped.
You would have met Banshee before.
Yeah, Banshee. Yeah, and
for sure. And he gets his original costume too. He doesn't get a nice costume update, right?
No, and that's what I like about that incident with Sunfire.
But Sunfire gets a costume update.
Yeah, slightly mask and the Rising Sun, which I don't like it.
I like the Rising Sun flag on his costume.
There's a whole reason why I don't like it.
Well, there is in this comic, right? Uh-huh. There's some stuff they screw up a little bit because it's the 70s and it's a white guy trying to write a multiracial cast.
Yeah.
There is one panel in here, one single panel, where you're like, is Len Wein the most racist person in the universe? One panel. We'll get there. We'll get to that panel. And it's also going to illustrate why Greg doesn't like the Rising Sun. There's two. Okay. I was thinking of there's one panel though that has two slurs in it at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you. I mean, I'll just say off the top. I mean, as a Japanese American, the Rising Sun, anything with the Rising Sun on it is kind of like looking at a rebel flag. to most Japanese Americans.
That's fair.
It's like, why would you wear that?
And
Fucking
I noticed
lost.
like in the Godzilla movie, there weren't even rising sun flags in it.
Because a lot of Japanese people just look at it like a rebel flag, where you're like,
right.
You just
and I mean the most recent Godzilla movie,
it's
right?
kind of a blight on the nation. So just kind of we acknowledge that it was a thing, and if you want historical accuracy, yes, okay, but for the most part, it's like most Japanese Americans, you see a dude like a white dude with his car with a big old imperial flag on it, and it's like, cool, you put that on your Honda and you don't even understand the concept, the reasoning behind it. Cool, awesome.
Yeah, and that's fair. So well, let's get into this. So we see, but there's 4 new characters here, and we have no idea who those characters are. And Len Wein was writing the Hulk.
Yeah.
And wrote the first appearances of Wolverine. So he's bringing Wolverine over from the Hulk. If you, it's interesting because if you read Dave Cockrum's notes anywhere, he didn't like Wolverine at all. He just thought he was a berserker moron. He hated the character. And that's why in later issues, he's the one that starts drawing him like with the redneck's tuxedo, the furry jean jacket and the sideburns to try to humanize him.
Yeah.
And it's just one more way of Cockrum inserting himself as an artist, right, to try to soften something and give it some life. Because he was thinking Wolverine in his original incarnation is just basically the Hulk, right? You can't do much with him.
Yeah.
And it's another situation where a writer and artist work together, but often just an artist will take a character and humanize the character and help develop. And let's, again, Len Wein created Wolverine. Mm-hmm. Dave Cockrum is the reason Wolverine is Wolverine.
Yeah. And it's such an interesting,
and paid no money ever for the creation of Wolverine because he didn't create him.
He just
perfected him.
Well, and then this lineup is such a powerful lineup too of characters. Like when you take a look at it, it is wild to think, because like in the previous lineup, you've got Beast like a tank, right? You've got Cyclops kind of a tank in a sense, but then you've got Jean Grey.
Thunderbird's a tank.
Well, no, I'm talking about like the previous lineup.
Oh,
you got Beast, tank, Cyclops, tank, Iceman, Jean Grey, strategic, and then you got Angel,
who's worthless.
No, he's your aerial strategist. Okay, then
who's worthless? He sucks. He flies.
He flies. It's true.
He's not cool until he becomes Archangel, and then they change him back.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
Then they made a character that had shoots razors at people, and only villains should be able to shoot razors at people, because heroes that shoot razors at people would murder them.
Yes,
that doesn't make a good hero.
Doesn't make a good hero. And then this team is like Wolverine powerhouse, Thunderbird powerhouse, a tank. Peter is a tank. Banshee, and Banshee's a tank too. I mean,
well, Banshee's more of your but I would make the argument that Banshee is more of that Storm and Banshee. We can get into the criticism I laid last week, because they really do use Storm. Storm is a tank too, but they use and I think rightfully so with this group, right? Banshee and Storm are your distance, and Sunfire are your distance folks. Right? Wolverine is like you throw Colossus and Thunderbird in first, and then Wolverine comes in and cleans up, right?
Yeah.
Because he's getting anybody that comes through. And then you've got your reconnaissance you've got your rogue, you got your reconnaissance with Nightcrawler, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, if you were creating a D&D group, right, you'd want this group.
This is a great group. This is a great team that you would roll up and want your stats up high and stuff like that. I mean, honestly, Storm is like, she's your all around catch. Like she does everything. Yeah. And she does it great. Like that's who you want on your team.
But she's also 100%. she's like your fighting mage, right? Because in that sense, because she doesn't have to go to the front lines most of the time, but when she does, she's gonna win.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
And of course, later they write her that way too. But let's not get that. Let's not get into like fighting Callisto in that, because so. All right, we should at least get to the second page. But I will tell you that Len Wein is the writer, editor, and co-creator with Dave Cockrum. So it's noted as co-creator. So if anybody was ever wondering, they even noted in the book. Dave Cockrum, co-creator, illustrator, Glynis Wein. So is that Len Wein's relative? Is that Len Wein's wife?
Glynis? Maybe Glynis? It's his full name?
No, the colorer. It says
Glynis Wein. Oh, yeah, I don't know. That's a good way. I guess you'll have to
look that up.
Look it up.
Podcast. Yeah. And John Costanza, I guarantee Dave Cockrum's favorite letterer right here. Yeah. All right. So
I have a feeling we're only going to get to like this book is broken up into 4 parts, folks. I think we're only going to get to a third.
we'll get it. So, I mean, so first off, the art is beautiful throughout. You've got amazing characters, the background. So we have this blue guy running through a village away from people with fire.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's like it's like in the Alps, and there's like all this wild stuff going on. The torches.
Yeah. We get a Mego advertisement for the Falcon, the Lizard, Green Goblin, and the Hulk. Fully posable 8-inch figures. And if Greg had those, he would be keeping those. Those were not things he would sell.
No, they're not. And like honestly, like when I was a kid, I swear my cousin Eric had these, and like because like he must have, because he was a little bit older than us. He must have got these at a garage sale or something like that, and thought they were dumb, and like he just like blew them up. I was so sad.
Fact, Glynis was Len Wein's wife for several years.
Oh wow! Look at that! Look who's smiling now.
Since 1985, she's been using her maiden name of Oliver. However, so
what? Say that one more time. Oliver.
She's been using her maiden name since 1985, so that should.
What's the maiden name?
Oliver. So Glynis Oliver.
Glynis Oliver. Okay, I thought you said Oliver Howell. I was like, what is that? Is all very long. Okay, continue.
But anyway, so of course, Professor X comes in and stops this, and he's like, "Hey, would you like to come to my school for mutants?" And he's like, "Sure," because you're taking me away from this rabid crowd who's murdering me, trying to murder me. So I get that. And by the way, before we continue, there is something we forgot to say with all that starting talk.
Yes.
So the idea here was you had already made the point that the stories had run stale with the group of sort of the persecuted heroes from America, right?
Yes.
So the idea here that they had in the relaunch, and I think they gave didn't the Cockrum book give a little bit of credit to Roy Thomas for this too? But Len Wein and Roy Thomas and Cockrum, they want a group of international heroes to illustrate that mutants were everywhere, right? So it wasn't just folks in the United States. So that's where we're getting this sort of cross section of heroes. So now we end up in Quebec. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I want to say the first round, like, I mean, in Professor Xavier's School of Gifted Students, Gifted Youth, they'd already gone through like 2 or 3 classes at this point, and a lot of those kids, obviously, all from the States, all from one of them at this point, I want to say Angel, because in this storyline he is. He's from England, so he was the international student. But everyone else is all from America. So,
and they're all very white.
Yeah.
They're the persecuted white guys.
Yeah. So we need to mix it up a bit.
Yes. and I will say too, as we go through, we'll get to it when we get there, but they try to introduce a multiracial cast. Sometimes, okay. Well, anyway, so we're in Quebec, Canada.
Yeah.
And Wolverine's hanging out at what would be known as Alpha Flight Space. Yeah.
Yeah.
Weapon X facility.
Yeah, Weapon X facility, Alpha Flight Space,
but we don't know that stuff yet.
Oh my gosh, there's so much I want to talk about this, but I can't. I'll say it for another time.
Well, we don't know this stuff. You're just gonna have to pick us out a Weapon X story later, right?
I know.
And so
or an Alpha
we get
run a 4-issue.
But starting up the Wolverine personality.
Yeah.
He's like, he is short. He's originally drawn with the blue and the yellow by Cockrum, which I think a lot of people assume that he's originally drawn with the blue and the yellow and the brown, right?
Yeah.
Or the brown, but he's not, right? He's originally the yellow and the blue, and he's got the winged headpiece to make him look like the Wolverine. And it said in the Cockrum bio that he didn't draw him originally. Like, this character wasn't drawn like Timberwolf. He was drawing like a different character Cockrum had been drawing. So I forget the name. It was one of the proposed characters Cockrum had been working on, which is interesting. But then when he draws him with the mutton chops and like make him look more feral, it's kind of, that's where you see the similarities there. So there you go. Not Timberwolf, if we were counting from the arguments past. Yeah, not Timberwolf, but still kind of Timberwolf. So we're gonna go. And Timberwolf is a character from Legion of Superheroes who has agility powers and recuperative powers. So not recuperative powers to the level of Wolverine's by any means. But there you go. So not even close. But yeah. So there are some similarities. So we go over and Wolverine basically tells the Canadian Army to go fuck themselves and leaves with Professor X. Not a fair. Is that a fair summary of a couple pages?
That's a fair summary of a couple pages. And from I can't leave this page without saying, and from that point on, it seals his fate as being a marked man with the Canadian military.
The Canadians are not as nice as you think they are.
They are not as nice as you think they are, because oh boy, anytime Wolverine steps foot in that country, he is a marked man.
They spent a lot of money on that guy. Well,
they
all right.
do. Alpha Flight and the Weapon X project from that point on is all about getting Wolverine if he goes into Canada.
Now, what I think is hilarious is you can tell Banshee's going to be a big part of the next group because he gets a whole 2 panels.
Well, I mean, he was a big part of the previous group for a hot minute or 10. And okay, so leading up to this, so Banshee, if you don't know who he is, he's a previous law enforcement officer back in the UK. So he was also from the UK too. Okay, so he and Professor X had a friend who was helping out run a installation to hold his Professor X's brother in a stasis chamber. Yeah, Moira to hold his. Yes.
He also his lover.
Yeah, at one point, but
spoiler,
they saw things differently. They couldn't. They just were on a friendship level, and Banshee and her took up the mantle.
Yep. So, but now Banshee is in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
Exactly where I thought he would be.
Well, I mean, he's a man of music and taste.
You will also notice that right sitting in front of somehow Phantom Girl went back 1,000 years, ended up in the Marvel universe, is sitting right in front of Banshee. Because that is Dave Cockrum, Phantom Girl, dead on right there.
Really?
Yes.
Crazy.
With the pigtails and everything. So there we go. And you're also going to see some of that. And of course, Banshee's relationship to the Legion of Superheroes is because Mike Grell is forced to draw the first Black Legionnaire, Tyrock, who has the exact same power set as Banshee.
Interesting. Okay.
And that's another story for another day. So
fair enough.
Now we go to Kenya and we meet Storm.
Yeah.
Who is being worshipped by people as a goddess of the weather. And she basically seems like she knows this is not quite right.
She knows that she's kind of like a huckster in a sense. Like she's like, hey, you guys want the weather to be good for you and your crops to grow? Okay, excellent. Give me this, and this, and I'll make it happen. All right, cool. You got the good weather.
And her hair seems to always cover her body.
Yeah, because I mean, So,
but anyway, we get and Cockrum is known for having costumes that show a lot of skin because they're those fashion costumes we talked about, right? Things that would only work on a. And so anyway, she's going to add a little bit more to her costume later than her hair and her skirt, I guess.
If you know about her power set, though, she does have the ability to do that kind of stuff. To really change and sway the weather and make things good for she can bring rain and all that. That can help crops and stuff like that. So it is good for the area that she's in, but it's a definite sad thing when she leaves, I'm sure.
Yeah, and she says to Xavier comes to her and is like, she's like, what can you offer a goddess? And he's like, what I offer you is the world. It's like, it's not beautiful, but it is real. And he's like, you are no goddess, Aurora, and you are a mutant and you have responsibilities. And she thinks about it and she's like, okay, perhaps it's time for me to go and do something with my life. So she goes.
Yeah.
And she goes off on her hero quest, which is really, and if you follow the Storm character, right, when Storm was being written well, Storm was always on a hero quest of some sort.
Oh, yeah. Like
whether that's when she shaved her head or because she was despondent during a low part of her hero quest, right? After the wonderful, I don't think, because Claremont didn't get it right all the time, even after the Siege Perilous storyline.
Yeah,
she's still on that hero quest. That's how you get Gambit, right?
Right.
And yeah, when the character, and this is her start. So it's always a cool one to see because she makes the decision to say, well, I'm going to go on this quest, right? I there are things for me beyond my station right now.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the cool thing is like you said, she's always on these quests, but she definitely her hero arcs are really, really good. And like if you do follow her storylines and how they intertwine a lot with Jean Grey and her story and arc and how they're very I'm not gonna say complementary because they don't complement, but they do bounce and balance. So
when I always thought, and I know later on in the 90s this changes, right? But I always thought the Storm character never succumbs to temptation. That was also one of the great things about the character for a long, long time, right?
Yeah,
I know they did some things later in the 90s, which I don't want to discuss.
Yeah.
But throughout the Claremont run, right?
Yeah.
She was tempted by power. She was tempted by fate. She was tempted by many things and never succumbed to them.
For sure. And I what I like about this run, what this builds up to is, I mean, it definitely puts her into a thing where she has lived her life as a goddess in Africa, doing all these things for the people and being worshipped, and then she's put into a team situation where she has to find her footing amongst other people, and not all of them have great personalities, obviously.
I feel like I'm like the only person that likes the Morlock storyline, but I think that's why I liked it, right? Like,
no, that's such a good one.
Okay.
Oh my
God.
God.
Maybe I'm not the only one. I always feel like I'm the only one because people shit on that storyline all the time.
Oh no, it's so good because like when you get into it and she's like, everything's happening and she's like, she's got the empathy, right?
One of the comics I got as a kid was when in that 3-pack, I get the story where she comes back from that, right, and gets rid of all her plants and shaves her head, and Kitty Pryde is like freaked out, like,
right.
What happened to you? And so I had to go back and read around that because I read that story like 50 times as a kid, but had no context for what was around it. But I was like, this is fascinating. But anyway, all right, so we've got to keep going.
Yeah.
We'll never get done. It'll be like 9 o'clock.
2 hours later.
Yeah.
We can't do that.
Okay, so let's get to Sunfire for a second, because I want to listen to you talk, because costume aside, okay, because costume, you're like, that's offensive. Okay, cool. I've always thought, like, I figured you as a Japanese American would find Sunfire offensive for a fuck ton more reasons than his costume, right? I've always found Sunfire in every iteration to just be a character I never want to see on the page.
Okay.
Ever. He's always an asshole. They used him later on for Rogue to take his powers away. She could have powers again when they reintroduce Ms. Marvel.
Right.
To me, he's just always been a character that to me has no redeeming qualities at all on the page. So tell me about Sunfire, because you've probably read a little bit more of these early Sunfire pieces, and maybe you can explain to me why they keep bringing this character back and forth.
All right, so Sunfire's a businessman, and that's why he's such a hard ass. And then also the Wolverine connection later on that you're bearing the lead on.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, you end up. I mean, there's a whole entire freaking movie based on their crap relationship.
Yeah, I don't know.
And his love for not Sunfire's love, but Wolverine's love for Sunfire's sister, right? So
yeah, I mean,
and the uncle.
You're not helping me.
Sunfire's a Yakuza, he's a secret Yakuza. So I mean, or he's connected to Yakuza people. So I mean, he's a good guy, but a bad guy. If he's a mutant. So he's just doing this because he's oh, hey, people know that I'm a mutant, so I got to do this. But also I'm connected to these bad people. And then there's also all these other things that are out there that are he's not necessarily, he's written, he's very tropey. But then again,
yes. He's a series of stereotypes.
He's a series of stereotypes.
He's a series of stereotypes in a book where almost every character is a stereotype.
So how can you hate one thing if you like everything else?
Well, no, because I didn't say I liked everything else, first off. And second, his is just a stack of stereotypes.
Yeah,
and he's
true.
Always an asshole.
Well, I mean...
I don't enjoy, I want some redeeming qualities from my characters, right? And he's just
understandable,
always an asshole.
At the same point, it's when a majority of the time when you're looking at people based off of either stereotypes or interactions with people, and you don't understand culturally why they act that way, and a lot of times when you're talking to Asian business people that are just either quiet or standoffish, it's not necessarily that's necessarily how they are. It's just how they conduct themselves in those types of situations. They might be jolly and jovial in lockdown personal situations and stuff like that, but if they're handling themselves in a business type situation, he's having this conversation with Professor X, and every other interaction that he's having with all of his teammates, he's looking at a business situation or interaction. He's gonna be a jerk. Regardless,
seriously have to have a geisha bringing him tea.
That's his sister.
Is it? Does it indicate that anywhere?
If you read further on into the story, into the rest of the story, that his sister.
But right here it doesn't.
Right there it doesn't. It implies, but generally speaking, probably acting as a servant. But for the most part, though, I mean, for it, you're putting the geisha stereotype on the person. Yeah. But most of the time,
it's a 1970s comic book.
It's a 1970s comic book, but
he's being delivered things by a woman.
But Eastern, cultural
I'm
aware.
Putting it there.
You're putting it there.
I'm putting it there.
But
I think the cultural art is putting it there.
But the art is putting it there. But you're also putting that lens over it, because have you been to Japan? Have you seen cultural wear?
I've never been to Japan because you won't go.
I've been.
I know you've been. Anyway,
But no, I'm just saying. I mean, cultural wear wise, and even at this time too, when this was written, and I'm just putting this lens on there for you, is maybe this was the appropriate attire at the time for them to be wearing.
Okay.
And
it would also not surprise me for Dave Cockrum to research the shit out of that.
Yeah. So, but you're saying geisha. Also, geishas would have more makeup on for their facial makeup and other things like that. That does not indicate geisha to me. Indicates just probably either a family member and as I know from the future stories, stuff like that, his sister does do a lot of these servant type added things as his attaché. So.
Okay. I don't know. I like that any better, but. Okay, so
moving forward.
Well, I think, but we will move forward. But I will say too, I think what brings the stereotypes to the front of this is his overarching attitude too, right?
Yeah, his over. But okay, you want to know?
Perhaps it's time once more for the world to love me. I know it doesn't say that, but that's pretty much.
Okay, you want to know how my as an Asian American, would I want this or not? As an Asian American at this time, if I was a kid reading this, you got to remember there's not a lot of representation in comics on the screen, either on TV or in movies. And if it was represented, it was usually done by a non-Asian American. So case in point, when people were put on the screen to be in those roles, they generally weren't. So David Carradine, not Asian American Kung Fu.
I'm picking at this a little bit because I wanted to get into one of these characters, right? And you have more insight than I do, so I'm picking at this a ton. We're going to get into Peter Rasputin in a minute, so I won't pick on that too much.
But when you put in a character like this and they put in all the stereotypes and stuff like that, sometimes it's like, yes, heavy-handed stereotypes, but at the same point, it's like, all right, you have this or you have that or you don't have it at all. So what would you rather have, right?
And that's the same with the Storm character, right? Yeah,
not saying that it's better or worse, but it's in the same. You got a character named Peter Rasputin from, Siberia. It's like, okay.
Well, let's jump to Peter the Great / Rasputin, right?
Yeah.
So let's jump there because I wanted the commentary on Sunfire. I wanted to spend it there instead of on Aurora, right? Like we could have spent had that almost identical conversation about the stereotypes where Storm is presented, right? Yeah. So I think it's good to have it there because I think you're far more qualified to talk about those panels in my mind than I am to talk about a Native African, right?
Well, and the same thing that I said about Sunfire can be said about Thunderbird as well. So I mean, it's
we'll cover Thunderbird in a second.
And then and I'm spoiler alert. I mean, like Thunderbird's only in the series for like four issues. So
well, because you always got to kill one of the tanks. So but here's Peter Rasputin. Yeah, I've never been a big fan of the last name.
He's unkillable, Dan. That's a great name. Rasputin is unkillable. You can't stab him. You can't shoot him. You can't poison him. You can't drown him. He's unkillable.
Well, the most important thing is
They should have called him Rasputin.
Yeah. So Peter is on a collective farm in Russia.
Yes. Wait. And it's their farm. The farm is theirs.
Yeah. No, it's not.
Our farm.
Yeah.
The farm is our farm.
And anyway, we get the retconned first appearance of Magic, which is not referenced at all right here. Could be any little girl he was saving. Does it say it's his sister? I don't remember it saying.
It does say it's his sister. Peter, look, our sister. Your sister.
That's right. Yeah. So, but the retconned first appearance of Magic as well.
Yeah, because later on in the series, his sister. Spoiler, everybody.
And obviously the most important first appearance in this issue.
Sister?
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's why everybody buys this issue is Ileana's first appearance.
Of course.
That's why everybody seeks out this issue, right?
Yeah.
You didn't know. It says right here, supporting characters, Ileana Rasputin, first appearance unnamed. That's why this issue is worth so much money.
Exactly.
So anyway, same idea. He saves her. He unveils his powers. His parents are very sad, but Professor X convinces him to go off for a greater cause to save the world. So our group of international heroes are, and then we get the most racist stereotype in the issue, which is the first appearance of Thunderbird. John Proudstar.
John Proudstar, which is
they do better. They do better with James Proudstar later. I'll just say that.
Yeah,
much better.
Yeah, his brother.
But but that was written much later.
Yeah. The redemption story of like, you can do better than your brother, be better than your brother.
Yep.
Don't be stubborn like your brother.
Yep. And we get, they call him an Apache, which there's a couple of other things in there that really make me uncomfortable later on about this. What I would say, I would say about the first appearance of John Proudstar is we do have native representation, which is good. It's very similar to some of the native representations I saw in the Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil Green Lantern works, right? Where they're trying, but I don't always get it. They don't always get it right. I think at least in the Green Lantern, Green Arrow stuff where they go back and they try to save. It's the famous one where Green Arrow and Green Lantern get in the fight in the. I don't even think we've covered this in the podcast, but they get in a fight in a river and knock each other out.
Oh yeah, no, we did cover it a little bit. We did cover the
fighting
book,
over. Yeah, they're fighting over the rights of natives to rule their land, right? Yeah. And they like Green Lantern's like, I'm gonna go to the government and they're gonna help, and Green Arrow's like, I'm gonna run the loggers off the land because the government ain't gonna help, and they get in a fight over it. And I think just because you had 2 issues where you could sort of fully develop this storyline, we get a few panels, and so they don't get as much time to develop it, right?
Right.
But they do show he's a powerful dude because he is like chasing a buffalo and like takes it down.
Yeah, he wrestles that thing down.
A bison, excuse me.
A bison, which is a buffalo.
Yes.
They're delicious.
And he gets recruited by Professor X again. I have no idea how Professor X got his wheelchair out there, but that's
and that's what he asked him. He's like, "How did you get out here?"
Yeah. But he agrees to join, and Professor X is like, "But will any of you, my new X-Men, be equal to the task that lies before you? Or will you carry the world down into ruin?" Uh-oh.
Oh, no.
Now, one thing I do want to bridge here is that I think one of the other things, too, that happens with Professor X in those old stories is, DC has in My Strange Adventure, right? Like they have the Chief, right?
Yeah.
Which is basically Professor X.
Yeah.
So we have, 2 teams of basically mutant, and DC basically goes as far as saying mutants, right?
Right.
So we have almost 2 identical teams happening. And I think that the concept gets burnt out by both, right? Because Doom Patrol goes down to a sad fate, too, that they tried to launch several times. And Doom Patrol, Doom Patrol in its entire history outside of probably the TV show, right? And the TV show is based off the 80s Morrison run, right?
Right.
So the Doom Patrol, they do a lot more with X-Men. Doom Patrol really has like 2 years of success.
Of good stuff.
And they've tried to relaunch it over and over and over and over and over again. And why am I blanking on the dude? Gerard Way.
Oh, yeah.
Did a good years of it, too, recently. Mm-hmm. They even had John Byrne try to do Doom Patrol, and it wasn't super great. So I thought that was funny. It's like you bring John Byrne to do the analog book for the X-Men. But I guess at that point, DC was trying to get anything they could get out of John Byrne after he destroyed Superman. So,
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we'll be to John Byrne in a minute. I promise not to get there yet. So chapter 2, we're going to fly a little bit because.
Oh, we're going to actually go into this. You don't want to hold off and
you know what?
And give the listeners a reprieve and a minute to soak all this in. And then we'll come back.
We should have a part 2. I think you're right. So if you're reading along with us, we are going to stop at. I don't know if you'll get this before we record this next one. You know what? I'll probably put this on New Year's, so they will get it before we record this one. But yeah. So we're through chapter 1, and that's it. And a lot of backstory about Dave Cockrum, and we're going to get into what these new heroes have to face next.
Oh my goodness, they have to face so much.
I'll talk about John Byrne, and in the next podcast, we'll talk about John Byrne being a tracer over Dave Cockrum.
Tracer, just like in why can't I think of the name of the movie now? Chasing
Amy. Yeah. Well, the thing here too is Cockrum inked his own stuff, at least for the first appearance.
Gotcha.
And then they have Bob McLeod. It looks like they have a whole bunch of different inkers for Sam Granger. So. Yeah, it looks like Sam Granger inks him for a while because Cockrum was too slow. That's one of the things Cockrum loved to ink his own stuff too, but he was just not fast enough if he's doing.
Yeah.
But Cockrum inks a few of his own stuff, a few issues, and they can change out inkers because Cockrum's pencils are so finished, it's not hard to ink him, right? So
Yeah. Solid work.
Bob Layton inked him in issue 105.
Mm.
Fun fact. Yeah, there are tons of inkers that went over him. So
he's been inked by all of them.
Yeah, and I could go on with this. Oh my God. Yeah, 107, the first appearance of the Legion, Imperial Guard. There's Colossal Boy. Yeah, so the Legion makes it back. And then after the first appearance of the Imperial Guard, we get one more issue. And actually, that was it. No, there's the Imperial Guard. And then that was the Star Smasher or Star Jammers. My bad. Not the Imperial Guard. But there's still Colossal Boy standing there. So,
well, I mean, in all honesty, they do what was it? Yeah.
And then you get John Byrne with issue 108 drawing Chris Claremont's characters.
When they get further into any of this, there is a whole entire run. Yeah, when they get all the characters back out of everything from this, there is a whole entire thing that does happen. Yeah, so you do get a lot of Legion style story.
Oh, you do. Oh, yes, you do.
Yeah, you do. When I was going back, when I was enjoying a lot of these stories last year, I was like, oh man, this is very, very much up Dan's alley.
Oh yeah, no, and that's and again, we'll wrap this podcast, but it's not like they say, even so. Let's talk about let's wrap this first one up by talking about Image Comics for a second, right? Okay. So Image was created by artists or writers?
Well, that's a good question.
It's easy because they were created by artists because they've acknowledged that, right?
Yeah, artists.
Because unless you write The Walking Dead, you've never been a vice president or a co-creative president, whatever they called it, right?
Okay.
At Image, right?
Gotcha.
So unless you're Robert Kirkman, he was the first writer they let be an executive, right? So I don't know if you knew that. Yeah. So that's the first writer they let be an executive, right, in their company, right? Which obviously, from a fiscal standpoint, you kind of had to, I would think, at that point, right? Because you need his properties. But, you think about a lot of people will say well, and obviously I want to give Claremont the credit. We were talking about this beginning, but I want to stress the point we were making, right? Cockrum designed, right, the characters that were the number one selling book at Marvel in the 80s and the number two selling book at DC from 1982 to Crisis until John Byrne destroyed the Legion.
Yeah.
Because John Byrne, when he relaunched Superman, said there was no Superboy. And if there was no Superboy, then there's no Legion of Superheroes, right?
Right.
There is, but there's no tie to the present, right? That was the whole, thing, right? So, and then, I would make the argument that John Byrne, being just massively overrated later, gets that big contract at DC and just destroys one of their biggest properties, to the point of, them killing Superman in the early 90s.
Right.
And it's amazing to me, right? And again, John Byrne is a creator, right? I may not like everything he did. There's some people that like what he did with the Superman launch. Sales would tell you otherwise, right? Because they got him off the books, right?
Yeah.
Very quickly. Why are you tapping the mic?
Sorry.
But, but anyway, I don't know. To me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because John Byrne was on X-Men for a long time, right? But to me, he gets pumped up by Claremont and Cockrum. And I don't think he ever delivered in any way close to what they delivered. And in fact, when he got opportunities to deliver heavy, he failed often. And it was all pushed out of this. I can't argue that on the DC side because Mike Grell is Mike Grell, and he went after Cockrum for Legion and then went on to do all sorts of his own shit, right?
Yeah. But
what's the great John Byrne indie book that's out there that you want to grab? What's his John Sable?
There's not.
So and again, I don't want to take away from John Byrne too much, right? So I want to back myself up just a little bit, right? Because he had run on Fantastic Four as well, right?
Right.
He created She-Hulk, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think. No, created by Stan Lee, it says, but
he did a lot of the building.
Yeah, the 70s She-Hulk, right?
Yeah. And that led to the She-Hulk that we know today.
Right. So,
I mean he helped with
everything.
The
Dan Slott. Well, anyway, but so I don't want to take away from him too much, but the big thing he's known for, right, obviously, is the two big things he's known for. I guess he's known for Fantastic Four, right? But I would argue the two big things he's known for are X-Men and Superman.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're saying what are the two pinnacle pieces of his career, one is X-Men and one is Superman. And Superman was an abject failure.
But the X-Men, it's up there with everything else.
Yeah, but he was drawing somebody else's creations, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. And again, I don't want to pick on like if I got the opportunity to hang out and talk to John, I always say his name wrong. John Byrne, right? It's not Byrne, it's Byrne, right? So if I got the opportunity to talk to John Byrne, right? First, I would say, why did you destroy the Legion of Superheroes? And then the second thing I would say is, dude, you're amazing, right? Let's talk comics history. Because just because I don't like something somebody did, and I'm making the argument for Cockrum's contributions here, I don't want to diminish John Byrne's history in comics, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to pump up is Dave Cockrum's contribution, right, to both of these things, and how I think underappreciated Cockrum is compared to, say, a John Byrne who got the big contract.
Yeah.
And it's like the guy that came after the guy that made the cool thing is the one that got the recognition. And that's always been weird to me.
And it just seems like that's always the case in every situation, be it comics, be it corporate world. It's always the person that's coming in afterwards that gets the notoriety, the recognition for the thing that was done before by somebody else, that they're like, oh, who is doing it now? It's you. And if that person's like, it's not me, but sure. They're like, they're never the person that's doing the thing, but they're the person that's in the shoes. And it's sad. That's sad on two levels. It's sad for the person that did the work that didn't get recognized, and it's sad that the person that got recognized didn't do the work and now has to be like, oh yeah, and they know that it wasn't their contribution that got them this thing because they're getting all the accolades for something that they had nothing to do with.
Now let's give John Byrne his due. Yeah. I keep saying he's tracing Cockrum, but as an artist in his own right, he was able to draw those costumes, right? So, it's not like let's give. I want to give the man some credit too. But the stylization, like if you go back to that splash page, a lot of the stylization of the costumes is not there in the Byrne run.
Yeah, that's true.
Like you lose a lot of those points of the costumes.
Yeah, they're a weaker rendition.
Yep.
But
especially Storm's.
Again, like you said, I mean, there are things that he did that were very notable that we don't get those jump off points later on for other things. So, I mean, applaud him for what he did do. Good job.
Yeah, well, and I would think too, after the 2 years on the book that Cockrum had, right? Like I'm sure that Claremont had enough power to get to pick who he wanted on the book too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I would think so. Claremont's like, I want that guy, right? So, there is that too. So, again, I don't want to take away from diminish his career, but I am trying to pump up Cockrum's career and just make the argument that the reason this book is what it is was because of him.
Right.
And we can get into story matter. And next episode, we'll get into the story matter, right? That shows us more of what Len Wein contributed to, right? In writing the story, and how he gave Claremont the jumping off point to get the X-Men where they were. Yeah, and I also wonder in some strange way too, like if Len Wein had stayed at Marvel, would he have just kept X-Men?
I think if Len Wein stayed at Marvel, we would have had a different X-Men run than what Chris Claremont delivered, because we wouldn't have a Chris Claremont run.
Right.
It would have been a Len Wein run all the way through.
Which would have been very interestingly different.
Yeah, and we would have. It would have been a different run altogether. It would have been very different.
And when you see some of the panels we're going to mention next episode, you're going to not want the Len Wein run. You're going to want the Claremont run. So,
I mean, are you though? I don't know.
Yeah, I think so.
Are you?
I think so. Well, how about we just leave it at that?
Leave it at that. But I mean, honestly, I feel like with the buildup of all this, this book, you get. Oh, I'll save it for the next issue. I'll save it for the next episode. Damn it.
Well, this is the first time in a long time we've split a book over 2 episodes. So, and talked for 2 episodes worth of material on the first quarter of a book. So
it is such a big book, people. That's why it's a yearly read.
And I said, we wouldn't overanalyze this book like everybody else, but we clearly are. But hopefully you're having fun with this. I'm going to say too, I'll grab my other 2 and give you the references later. But first, Get the Life and Art of Dave Cockrum by Glenn Cadogan. So even if you should be able to get the PDF version too. And by the way, I went to go back and get Destroyer Duck. If you saw Greg open his Destroyer Duck.
So good.
On the video. It's out of print now. I can't buy myself another one.
Ha, ha, ha. It's mine.
I know. I was like, damn it.
Ha, ha.
Yeah. So I was like, I know. I was like,
sorry. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you now have. I wonder if I can get it on Amazon. I haven't looked there.
Oh, that's terrible.
But it's out of print on Tomorrow's site. So congratulations, you have
such a good
something
book.
Cool. Yeah,
it is. I do.
And that's all. I mean, that's all I have. I mean, obviously, we were at the Retro Emporium in Kent, Washington, so go there. If you're in the Tacoma area and you want to learn some jiu-jitsu, visit our friend, the jiu-jitsu lawyer, Paul Boudreau, at Certified Martial Arts. And you have a book that's for sale.
Absolute Zeros Camp Launchpad coming out in March. So hit up all your spots for book pre-orders, be it Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or your local comic book store, and get those pre-orders in, because every pre-order counts, and we are in that time frame to get those pre-orders in. So do it and jump on it. And as Dan will say, Dan?
Well, I mean, of course, the book comes, if you buy the hardcover, it comes with an MXPX CD, and it smells like vanilla cupcakes.
There you go. I can't guarantee that you'll get either of those things, but if you do show up at the store or at the Retro Emporium or at a convention or something like that, where I will be at, and you do bring a copy of the book and a copy of an MXPX CD, I will sign it for you. So the CD, that is. So
yeah. So there you go.
It's such a ridiculous thing, but I know somebody's gonna do it, just like that time with the other CD. That's too weird. Too weird.
I mean, I would definitely recommend that. I mean, why wouldn't you?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know. Odd things. I can't wait till we cover chapter 2 for this, because it's so good.
Yeah, I can't wait either. I mean, it's going to be fantastic. We're going to cover all the chapters next time. So,
are we? I don't think we can. There's going to be so much to talk about.
Well, it's a new year. It's a new start. We got into some X-Men, and Greg got to read his book. So, yeah, we're there, and we look forward to talking with you again in a week. And yeah. Thanks. We love you.
Talk to you later.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.